All right, and we're live. And I've got on the stream with me now Maria Pia, who I only just realized is an actual person, and that Silvio Di Baci is a character. Maria, how are you going? Oop. Seem to. We had Maria there. Let's
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Cool. Hello.
And how's it going? I was just saying, in case you missed the intro again, that I only just realized that you're a real person and that Silvio is not.
I feel like that's also because Silvio is just such like a memorable person, you know.
You've done a good job creating him as a character. You know, had the email address, the Facebook page, and look, I'll be honest with you, that when I saw the picture of Silvio there on the Fringe website, that I swear he was the sort of person that I would have seen at Voltaire on a Friday at the open mic. You'd see there every weekend doing some just absolutely terrible stand-up that bombs, but he's there every time.
Well, it's actually quite funny because I did like get my start almost in the world at Club Voltaire, so I think that maybe the people at Voltaire thought the same thing.
And that's I can see that you're going for that real, Italian Stallion sort of a very, very Melbourne style character of that good old Italian boy who simultaneously both loves and hates his mother, loves women, but is just very terrible at getting their attention, but has more than enough confidence to compensate.
Yeah, well, I think that like there's some things that make Silvio a bit unique. Like, for example, he's very proudly bisexual. So he'll just try and seduce anyone who shows up to his show. He's a bit narcissistic in that way. Like other things, like I'd say that he's very much like proud of his culture and identity, and he wants to like kind of show it in like a really positive way. Especially because there's always like those stereotypes of how like Italian men behave sometimes. So I really wanted to kind of show a character that is very, his best friend he's just really down with, and like really like every show kind of basically like plunges into like, deep admiration for him to the point where he calls up and says, you know what, Silvio, can you stop talking about me? It's a bit weird.
So he's maybe not the most toxic Italian out there.
Yeah, so I guess it's like I tried to create someone who was just really not toxic, a lot of fun. Like I just wanted to be like a character or like a person that really, like, when someone saw, they were like, oh, that was really funny, but it was also like really nice. Like it made people feel good. Like it didn't make people feel like harassed or like, like that Silvio had to act a certain way. Like, sure, there's like a few like jokes that are cheeky or something like that, but like Silvio's very into like, making sure that his audience feels safe, because like the audience is so part of his shows as well.
Okay, initial impressions for me was going to be much more of the sort of guy who was just a terrible person and didn't realize why everyone didn't see him as a beautiful and wonderful as he sees himself as.
Well, I feel like he is obsessed with like himself in some ways. Like he's just like, yeah, I'm pretty sexy, I'm pretty cool, I'm pretty going well. But I think that that's also like one of the qualities that makes him like also fun to hang out with, because he's like feeling, I don't know, I feel like Lizzo vibes, but also Australian drag king.
Yeah, that I guess that overconfidence can be a bit more of an endearing quality, rather than making him someone that you love to hate.
Yeah, and I really like a lot of theatre like that originates from Italy, like commedia dell'arte. in that like how they kind of brought out a lot of kind of characters that like were buffoons, like they were foolish, like they were dumb. You could like laugh at them.
I remember the like the puppet shows and the masquerades that back in my primary school, because we had such an Italian background there, that we every now and then we'd get that where a guy would come and put on the masks and play the stock characters, and the characters are dumb and goofy and flawed, but that's what makes them so much fun.
Yeah, and it's like just not taking things seriously, but then not using that as an excuse to make them terrible, I guess. Like, I mean, I feel like sometimes, like, in media and such, they use the excuse of, well, everyone's flawed, to just give people, like, terrible, like, that's a terrible thing to do. But they're like, yeah, but people are flawed. That's completely fine. Whereas I argue that you can show flaws and you can show, like, buffoonery and show, like, taking the piss out of a character, but still, like, treat them with respect and, like, tell them what they, like, what's a good kid thing to do, I guess.
Yeah, and that it's those flaws are sort of, they become the source of the drama, and that I guess the hope is that maybe in some way that they learn from it, but they can't too much, otherwise they change too much as a person, they're not going to get into those situations anymore.
Yeah, and like I found that like my biggest like influence from like that theatre form is the fact that like a lot of the lower class kind of characters, so like Alekino and stuff like that, they would do kind of like fall in love in this like kind of very crass, like like fighting in front of like their like loved ones, but then like their loved ones still are into them. And I just really loved like always like the lower class, they were super dramatic. They're like, my love, like over, like it just seemed ridiculous. And I just loved those. What did you say?
Or just how they're so extremely over the top, and like they fall in love with characters very quickly and very intensely.
Yeah, and you will definitely see that in Silvio. Like I feel like that's like key character strength.
Thinking about it now, it almost feels like a much more dramatized version of the Facebook drama that you see on those people from high school that you still have on, you still follow on Facebook.
Yeah, like I remember one time I did a show and they said that my like the show itself is very much like a melodrama. Like it's just everything's just like raised to 100. And it's just classic, entertaining to watch in some ways.
The classic, like everything happens so much.
Yeah. And I also like think it's good to mention how much I use like music in the show. Like it's a very integral part of the show.
Okay. That's one thing I did spy though, is that in one of your videos of Silvio on your Facebook page, that he was meant to be playing guitar, but your technique was way off.
Well, I think that like the point of that one was to show like him like kind of making his like Latvian premiere in Eurovision.
And so it's the character of Silvio that can't play guitar, not you.
Oh, well, I can't play guitar for shit either. But I loved, what was the coolest thing about that is that the guys who actually made the song, that are like the Latvian musicians and artists that were in Eurovision that I'm obsessed with, they like liked and like were like impressed by my like homage to them. They probably were like, wow, we're still relevant to this random Australian in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, sometimes things like that when people see the reach that they have, that someone in Australia actually listens and cares about your music, they're less concerned about the weird context and how that's expressed. So
yeah.
Even though it is for a rather this strange drag king show, that they're just more happy that people are still listening.
Yeah. I really love doing that like video because I just like I felt like it was very Sylvia as well because the song is just like about baking a cake.
Yeah. So it's just such
And
yeah.
what was just like really great about it was just like I don't know, I was like, yeah, I'm going to my hippie commune sort of thing of like pretending that I can play guitar and um you know, like what I would think, like when I think of this song, like what kind of mood do I get? And I had some spare leftover cake, so it worked out really well.
Any excuse for cake.
Yeah.
Now,
I mean, like I also like have a scene in like this upcoming show where I'm just like eating a bunch of like food, so that's a bit of a, you know.
now is that necessary to the plot, or is that just you kind of conveniently added that in?
It was something that I did in the previous show that was similar, and I thought, oh, this is a good way to like, you know, add some like fun weirdness to it. So I just was like, oh, you know, it's not too bad. Also, I was like, I can choose what food I want to eat. Like maybe get some pizza, maybe get some pasta, and it's like take it as like a beautiful thing not to worry about too much.
Yeah, and I mean, doing a show is exhausting. That anywhere you can work in, sort of, you know, just fueling up to keep going is always a bonus.
Yeah, I call it my like I need to eat the food in order to have some like energy.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Continue.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about is, as I mentioned, that you know how Silvio is actually a drag king character. So, I actually had some people on stream last night who were doing a show about drag queens and the drag scene there. How does the drag king and the drag queen scene differ?
It's actually really interesting. I like you're actually talking to someone who is doing a thesis on drag and burlesque.
Really?
Yeah. So it's kind of like you kind of like you thought that like you were talking to just some random, but now like I've got some like qualifications to throw at you.
Oh no, it's one of those things I've found that I'm into writing, done a bit of writing myself, but a lot of especially Australian writers, they end up getting PhDs more as a means to get funding for their work. So you have all these extremely qualified people who then are technically unemployable because they're, you know, writing books, and that just with the way things are in Australia, I imagine that, you know, things like drag and burlesque can end up being, you know, a bit similar. That you partially do the PhD because you just love the medium and love the industry, but if it means that you get a grant to put on a show as well, that's just another incentive.
Yeah. So what I would say is like the way that I define it in my like soon to be thesis kind of next year. I'm working on it now, so basically I see that drag is kind of like a persona that you kind of put on that can be exploring like ideas like identity, culture, sexuality, like various different things. And there's like various different types of drag, not just drag kings and queens, although those are the most common, but there's like a very like plethora of like androgynous or like doing various different kind of so like a drag they could define themselves as still a drag king, but they can also do like things that are more like using like things to like look like a skeleton, or like it's more of like it's a style that's like more like into, I can't remember what it's called, but like there's like a lot of different styles of drag. And like what I would say in comparison to like drag queens and drag kings, so like you can do drag in various different ways, you know, like for example, like a lot of people you know who are drag queens don't even shave their beard. Like it's not the point necessarily to look like realistic, and like there's a presumption that people want to do that, but it's like people just like the idea of kind of playing these like personas and such.
Yeah, and it's more like just about the glamorous side of being able to put on like a nice wig and dress and makeup. That sometimes
Yeah,
maybe it's
well, like people
not
do it
as
for
about.
different reasons. Like
Yeah,
I really like a lot of the stuff that Kong's Kings do, where it's like a lot of the performers that they have are very political, and like using like it as a means of kind of like discussing a lot of things, but also like they have like some that are very much more like what people would say as masculine and such. Um, but I find that like it shows just how many different like drag performers there are. And it's just like it's often just like putting on a persona, and it doesn't have to necessarily be to look like the most dolled up, or it doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna like look very butch if you're a drag king and such. Like I love like drag performers that like, you know, will make like a beard out of lace or glitter, or like not even wear one at all, or doesn't even care to like you know, strap their boobs or anything like that. Like it just shows that like you can do it any way you like.
yeah, and I think that's part of the big appeal, isn't it? That once you get into especially something like drag, it just ends up being that there's really no rules and you can just do whatever.
Yeah, like one of the things that a lot of people are very I know like they can be very nasty about in the drag community is like people who do drag based on their own gender. So if they're female identifying, they do drag as like a queen. There was like a lot of controversy about that from a lot of people. However, it's kind of keeping, and like it just like makes it very toxic, you know? So like it's kind of like there's like a big push as well to you know, support all drag performers, and it doesn't really matter how like people identify. It's not really the point necessarily of drag. And like to gatekeep that is also gatekeeping like you know, like what other things you get out of it and such. So yeah.
Yeah, I can see how that would be the sort of space where people would have very strong opinions about who should be able to drag what, and usually those are people who are just observers and have very little involvement with actually performing.
Yeah, and it's like I feel like also you know, like just to create like a community that's like helping each other and stuff, and like, you know, like it's so different. So you just kind of want to make sure that everyone feels supported. Like I really like doing drag king stuff because there's a really big community worldwide, and there's a lot of opportunities that kind of came out of COVID to like interact and work with a bunch of different drag performers.
Yeah, now one thing I'm just wondering is being a drag king sort of. I think of there's a lot of industries where it's a bit more disproportionate in that the we can use air quotes here, but the women get more attention. Does being a drag king sort of, do you end up in the shadow a little bit of drag queens because everyone lavishes attention on all these these are women who put on the dresses and get glamorous and everything, or is it maybe a bit more of a one-to-one?
I think that it's a really interesting question that you brought up. I'd say that like for like the most part, it's a very positive relationship. There are less drag kings than queens. That comes from also drag king, like that kind of culture being a newer one, as well as like having like as in like also like it's seen as like a newer thing, as well as there are like some stereotypical kind of things about like, oh well, you'd rather see like an attractive woman, or like see like someone who's really glamorous and such. So it's like, I don't know, for example, I don't think anyone, like this might be just like me selling myself short, but I don't think anyone would want to buy Silvio, like, you know, book Silvio out for their birthday. Like, be like, oh, Silvio, you're so cool. I want you for my birthday. You're so hilarious. You can be there. Because, like, something that is very, I think, unique to a lot of drag queens is the fact that they can be like they have a lot of different profit streams. Like, they are able to like to be in parties and like to work them. And although they do that for comedians, because it seems like, you know, drag kings aren't necessarily as glamorous. And that's not necessarily true. Like, I've seen so many like glamorous drag kings in my time, but like, because there's like a presumption that's often like causes like some differences, I guess.
Yeah, it almost feels like that to be a drag king, you can't just be a drag king. You'd have to also be like bill yourself as a comedian or a performer in another way, and then it almost feels like being a drag king is like the gimmick, whereas the drag queen, that's almost just the appeal in itself.
Yeah, and I don't want to like also like be like, drag queens, like as in like I really like, it's like they also create like really healthy and really positive spaces for a lot of young drag kings to also join. Um, there's like a lot of spaces that are around Melbourne that are very like nurturing of that. And there's some places where I swear, like, although like they're hosted by like drag queens, like it's just become like a plethora of drag kings. And it's just funny seeing how many drag kings there are out there, and it's just like, oh no, they're outnumbering.
Yeah, okay. Because
Yeah.
one thing that I thought of as a comparison, seeing that this was, you were doing a drag king show, is that as a result of lockdown, my girlfriend and I, we've been watching. I don't know if you've seen the VTubers on the internet. They're streamers and everything as well. It's people where they'll play games and they'll sing and do whatever, but they use an iPhone to just capture their facial expressions, and then that goes onto an anime avatar.
Yeah.
And the girls doing it, a couple of them have just gotten over 1 million followers, whereas for one company, the highest male performer has about 50,000 subscribers on YouTube. So there's just this massive difference, and that as hard as they work, that I think it's one of those things that whether it's a cute anime girl or just a glamorous drag queen, sometimes it can feel hard to compete.
I feel like, though, I think that like something to mention as well is that also has more to do with the audience than like necessarily the performer. Like, I'm not gonna hate on the performer if they're like very successful in like the world and such. It is harder sometimes to get kind of recognition because, like for me, I think that my kind of drag comes out more when I perform. So like if you see me perform, it's very different from when I take a photo. Like a lot of the photos that I have aren't as like dramatic or anything new compared to anyone else. They just think, oh, you're a dude. Like that's all. Like like there's not really that like mass like amazing like makeup work being done for me. And I'm okay with that. Like I really like that. I like, Silvio is someone who, doesn't have a beard because he that's not his vibe, or like, he likes wearing leather jackets and he usually doesn't wear much other than that because like he just likes the idea of looking like a greaser and such. Like I think that everything is just very much related to what I wanted to create. And like there were moments like I went to like a few drag nights, right? And they asked me to perform. And I like had like a bit of like a comedy set up, just to kind of warm up the audience for a bit. And then they were like, oh, we just wanted you to do a song, because there's like a presumption in like drag culture of just like doing like a song, like a lip sync kind of thing. And I do that in my show. It's just that I kind of like the comedy sets it up, and then like, so I like make jokes and such and warm it up, and then I kind of use like lip sync as a means of telling the story. Like everything I do tells a story, and that's something that can be very unusual because a lot of drag performers perform more as, oh, this is a fun song to do, you know, making jokes and such, but it's not necessarily like an actual like linear narrative.
Yeah,
I always like, for some reason I'm just compelled to do linear narratives. I'm like, there has to be a reason why I'm doing this thing.
yeah, and that was the vibe I was getting from the description, that it was more than just a drag king show. It almost felt like a bit of a one man show. That
Yeah, it's definitely a solo show. Like the only difference is that there's more music, I guess, and like more campiness.
yeah, no, and that's I feel like that's the sort of thing can really help to pull an audience through, and having that bit of narrative just makes it that bit more engaging.
Yeah, and I really like, I started out like one of the first performances that I did was through Monash had a cabaret festival. So I decided to do it with a friend of mine who was also Italian, and we decided to do it together. And we performed like this show, and it was just like, it was basically like what I do normally, but you know, it was 2 people, and we just had like a lot of fun with it, and everyone's like pissing themselves laughing. And then I was like, you know what? I could totally like do this as more of a, you know, a bigger audience thing.
All right, now that's great. Something that always sort of interests me. There is a real cabaret scene down here in Melbourne. How does one sort of get into that, or, you know, performing? Because I've seen it be very close to the stand-up scene, but it's not something that I've quite gotten into.
I feel like for me, it was like I just got an in, you know, like not like nepotism in, just like some crazy person thinking that I could just like fill a show kind of thing. Like when I was at Voltaire, I just like put my hand up, and very cool there, where they really give a space for a person to be a performer. Like they didn't kind of make it really intense for you. You kind of just like said, hey, I'm interested, and then they're like, okay, show me what you got. If you bomb in the first show, maybe like don't come back. Nah, they're pretty nice.
Yeah, and I think that's something a lot of people don't.
Show.
People don't realize just how accessible things like this is. If it's something you want to do, you get a lot of leeway to try, and it's only if you're, you know, not even if you're really bad at it, but if you're just a really toxic person almost to be around backstage.
Oh, but I think that there's also another layer where it's just like impossible to just start sometimes. Like I found it really hard, and it wasn't like, if I didn't have someone who like just let me do what I wanted to do, then I probably wouldn't have gone through all of this. Like really 100%.
Yeah, it can be difficult. Like if it's something that you're doing yourself, it's not an assignment. There's no hard deadline. That incentive to just actually do it. There's nothing extra sort of like pushing you.
Like
that just makes it hard to finally take the plunge, because it's not like there's anything forcing you to do it. You have to go and put yourself out there, and sort of who wants to, you know, agonize over coming over an act and putting themselves in front of an audience unless you really need to.
And like I was always terrified that nobody would show up.
Which, you know, then you realize, especially after your first couple of shows, it's probably a good thing, because, you know, it takes you a while to actually get good at something, and you know, then you just become like, God, I'm glad no one saw that while I was still figuring it out.
Honestly, I'm happy if someone comes when I'm figuring things out. Like, I don't know, a lot of my show like somehow becomes improv. Like I really like doing live shows because like I just really love just like going into crazy random plots and such, and it's honestly become funnier and kind of created its own life sort of thing.
Yeah, and I guess
like, I mean, I still like have like ways to go, I guess, but I really like, I think that it's also like, honestly, if I got a review and it was a bad review and it said this is what you need to work on, I'd be like, yep, sweet, like maybe people will judge me, but at least they know my name, you know?
Yeah, and as long as that feedback's constructive, you can tell when it's coming from a positive place and people are trying to help, or if they're just being mean and trying to hurt.
Honestly, like if like someone like really like beefed with like Silvio, I probably like you know, do like a diss track, you know, shots fired sort of vibe.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's a little bit ridiculous to have a major problem with the character because, you know, it gives you that freedom of the character isn't real. You can get away with sort of doing more of whatever you want.
Yeah. Also, like I don't know, I like to like there's like an element of like Silvio that I just think is like also like I hold accountable, like as in like I do think that like I want to ensure that like the kind of show that I perform is one that's like really positive and really like I just want there to be like never like a situation where like an audience member is feeling really uncomfortable or anything like that. Like I just think that that's really important to try and like set out as like something that you're really into from the start. And I try to also like not try and make cheap jokes, like jokes that like, you know, are like a bit just looking for shock value and stuff.
Yeah, which can be an easy trapping to get into, especially when playing such a flawed character, where you can be like,
yeah,
oh,
like I mean, for me, I could easily, like kind of do like the stereotype of like a very misogynistic kind of character and such, right?
yeah,
Because that's something that often happens when you kind of parody men. Who would have thought? Like for me, like this was a personal choice. Like I mean, every performer can do whatevs, but for me, I just thought like, why would I want to contribute another like shitty male? Like you know, like why would I want to like make someone who is kind of like who I don't want to be? Like I would like if I have to like you know portray another character and like on like a drag persona, like I wanted to be someone that I'd actually like, you know, like I'd still be like you're ridiculous, but I like wouldn't hate myself for hanging out with or whatever. And I think that that's also a good way of attracting an audience, because you don't want your audience to be like like he's trash, you know.
Yeah, no, I get that it's as much as you want to do this fun flawed character, they can't be a complete arsehole, and there needs to be those redeeming qualities. And look, now we're sort of talking around Silvio a little bit, but I want to talk about Silvio as a character a bit more, and you know that's part of the whole reason that I was playing Duke Nukem here. That to me, that as I was sort of saying, that the Silvio seems like the sort of person that would still quite unironically like the the parody that Duke Nukem is meant to be in a much more earnest sense. That I was just wondering, like, is Silvio going to be more the type of character that watches The Sopranos and thinks like, wow, Tony's so cool, I want to be like him?
Oh, he like this is gonna break your heart, but he would never watch The Sopranos because his mom told him that it was too stereotypical. It was too like sweary and aggressive and all this stuff. So his mom was like, "No, I'm gonna set you straight. You're not gonna watch The Sopranos. That's not a good show to watch." To like, but he did watch like, for example, Grease, and like fell in love with Danny Zuko, maybe literally, and like kind of was like, yeah, this is like my idea of like how to be like a cool guy kind of thing, as well as kind of like looking at like other characters of like Italian descent through like history and stuff, like often the ones that weren't kind of associated with the mafia. And I think that also kind of comes back to like my upbringing either, just in the sense that like I remember growing up, like my mum would like hate any film that was like too stereotypical, like particularly because like we were from like an area that like the mafia was like all like like my mum was born in like an area that was like had more of like a mafia influence on the region. So she was just kind of like, oh, not another one,
No, that makes sense. That I just remember.
Or it's almost as if he's like portraying like if like
He's
I
like
don't know,
the
the Godfather
good
and
bad
the Surprise
Italians,
didn't
not
exist or
the
something.
bad Italians. Because I remember I tried watching The Sopranos and I just found it too difficult because growing up in a town with a lot of Italians there, I saw a lot of the same sort of people where it's just angry men that don't understand how complex an emotional spectrum can be, and they're like,
Yeah.
why am I like angry for no reason, and why can I
Yeah,
be?
and like for me, I just didn't want to show like someone who was just like angry for no reason, and like I have seen like parts of The Sopranos, like I haven't finished the whole like series, but I don't know, there was bits that I was like, oh, like it like it's interesting because it was one of the first TV shows that kind of had like more of a like anti-hero kind of complex character who was also kind of like like set up for other shows like Breaking Bad and all of that.
Yeah,
But then I don't know, to I just found it like a bit interesting that to be a realistic character, sometimes like writers attempt to like create like these kind of characters with like a lot of like problems and various things that they have to deal with. And I think that's true, but like I don't think that every person, like including performers, like necessarily show all of their like like they don't have to like necessarily go and discuss those. I don't know, like maybe I'm backing out of what I'm saying, but
but
I
no,
guess like
it's like shorthand for a complex character is to just make them an asshole.
or yeah, or like like the stereotype of like why like a teenager, like I'm watching like that like teen comedy show because I have like I don't know why I'm doing it, but like the stereotype of like the kid that had their parents divorced, and I'm like, man, all these kids that have their parents divorced like presented in TV just always are like super depressed. So you think that like they'd like there'd be at least one that was like somewhat like, oh, this is fine, it's at least better than them complaining all the time. I don't know. I just like maybe I'm just like being the worst.
Yeah, it's like
The
people
other
like
thing
to
like
talk
I'd
about
say as
how
well is like like the superhero effect or something or whatever, where it's like if you want to add depth to a character, make one of their parents die. It's
yeah,
like
like the classic Disney
why
thing.
can't they just be like somewhat like just like, oh, I'm gonna do this for my own like for another motivation,
Yeah, that there always has to be that, or the classic they it's gotten so common they call it fridging, where like to someone's girlfriend has to die to motivate them to do the thing.
Yeah. Whereas like for Silvio, every time he like most of the time he's motivated by like Gloria rejecting him.
Yeah,
It's like,
okay.
oh well, time to find a new love.
Well, that's good. That's a lot more. That's a lot healthier than especially some of the Italians in that I grew up around. I'll tell you about this one guy that that he was in my brother's year at school, and he had Italian parents, but he was actually adopted, so he himself wasn't Italian. But during one of the World Cups, he put a picture on Facebook of him with like an Italian flag that had Tony Montana from Scarface on it, so a Cuban, and the caption that he used for it was just pride. So there's a lot going on with that, and
I love that though. Like for example, for me, like this is super embarrassing. Like this is so embarrassing. Like I kind of get his vibe in a sense. Like when I was younger, I'd watch West Side Story, right?
yeah,
And for some reason, I did not understand that they were all supposed to be Puerto Rican because I was like, they share my name, Maria. Must be Italian. So I was super like, yeah, like this is a beautiful story about people like, like an Italian tried to like get married to like someone who's not Italian. What a beautiful story.
I imagine part of that could be depending on what version you're watching with the casting. They
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm pretty sure only one person was actually like Puerto Rican or like
Yeah.
of like Latina
Otherwise,
descent.
they come across a very, very Caucasian.
Yeah.
And you,
So like honestly, like maybe it was just me like proving that. Nah, I'm just like a dumb kid.
no, I think that's a. There was probably a bit of some casting problems in that. The
Yeah.
fed into
But
it.
like me watching Grease as a kid, I was like, yeah, these 30-year-olds are definitely 15. That's what I'm gonna look like when I'm 15.
Yeah, no, I think especially those teen dramas, they have a lot to explain for why we all didn't have square jaws and such defined muscles when we were 15, not realizing how old the actors actually were.
I don't know about you, Tom, but that was definitely me in high school.
Well,
I don't
did
know why I
actually
didn't get all the men, all the women.
I did actually start growing in a beard during high school. I mean, I haven't had to show my ID to buy booze since I was 16.
Well, like I had like a similar situation happen. Like I always looked quite old for like my age for some reason. So then one time I accidentally, and I have to emphasize this, I accidentally got into an 18 plus movie
Accidentally.
because I didn't realize it was 18 plus, and me and my sister went to see it, and she was older than 18, but I wasn't, and it was like 90% porn, and we both didn't realize it, and we were both like, oh, this is like super awkward to watch with siblings.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. So, yeah, so going back to Silvio, so got the more positive Italian role models. So it's people like all John Travolta's characters. So is Rocky one of them as well?
No, just because I've never been into sports that much. Like Sylvia's a bit into sports, he's into soccer, but that's more like in his blood, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Well, who else does Silvio really look up to?
It's actually really weird. I guess like George Michael. I know he's not Italian, but like he's
He
like in the first few shows that like I did, I had this notebook that had George Michael's face on it, and I would bring it on stage. It was very wholesome.
Now I would say that George Michael probably was somewhat Italian passing. That if you told me that George Michael actually had some Italian in him, that I would probably just believe it.
Yeah, well, like, you know who was someone who really surprised me and also was inspiring Silvio vibes?
Who was that?
Billy Joel.
Billy Joel. Oh,
Not Italian whatsoever.
I can almost see that, especially you drawing from the performer side, and that maybe definitely there might be some musical influence that someone like Silvio maybe would really enjoy Billy Joel's music.
Yeah. Like, I feel like Billy Joel is really interesting to me. I just really like how he tells a story in his music.
Yeah.
And I think it's very common of the 70s as well to have like a lot of music that has
A bit more of an actual narrative to it.
yeah, and I really like using narrative and like having like more specifics in my performing. And like I use one of his songs sometimes in my show, like scenes from an Italian restaurant, and I think that's probably the reason why everyone thought he was Italian.
But would otherwise, like, I know that a lot of Italians, they're quite locked into their love of classic rock. So would Silvio also love bands like Guns N' Roses and more of those rock bands from the 70s and 80s?
Yeah, and I can't say that like I'm the same always, but like I am like very into like the cheesy, 80s ballads.
No, of course. I'm a bit more of a metal guy myself, but you get a lot of people, sort of, especially around where I grew up, who were more of that Italian descent, being like, yeah, I love rock and metal. Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses, I love that shit. And like, I'm talking about like Metallica as an entry point.
I also grew up with like 60s Italian music because of my mum.
Ooh, that seems like some
But I love it. Like some of those songs, like I wouldn't have found unless I grew up with them. I use sometimes with my shows. And there's like this beautiful song by Albano, which is called Nel Sole, which is it sounds like the most depressing shit that you ever hear. Like it literally starts with like perché, ma perché questa notte alle ore più lunghe, like it goes like that, right? Like it's like, what song in English would literally start with someone saying why?
Yeah.
So it's just like the best song to use to, like, I don't know, if you want to do melodrama, you just put on like a super like Italian song that just like, like people can feel how depresso they're trying to be.
Oh, I mean, the Italians, they're just completely melodramatic to start with, though, aren't they?
But I feel like that's also like the reason why they do that is because they're not afraid of like people taking the piss, like it's like, I feel like a lot of Italian, like there's a lot of Italian stereotypes and stuff, and it's often because like I feel like as a culture they're okay with people taking the piss sometimes, but then there's a moment where people take it too far. And it's sometimes annoying because it's just like, oh, like there's all these like stereotypical things that are associated with like the culture, but then at the same time it's like at least people don't hate it.
Yeah, and that sort of plays off like the big part of the whole Italian culture is family, and that, when you're so close to people and you know them so well, you can take the piss out of each other because it's just a joke, and that you're not actually trying to hurt each other's feelings.
And like for me as well, like I found like when I was studying in Italy last year, which was really good. I presume people thought that, other than the fact that like I was like this close to being stuck in Italy for like months.
Yeah, I guess that's was good that worked out.
What I found really interesting is sometimes I had like a few moments where I would be invited to have the meal with like a few people from the town, such like a little local thing.
Okay, yeah, and so it was like a broader community thing rather than just say who you were immediately living with.
Yeah, it was really nice. The only thing that I was very turned up about, like I was really like, was the person that I ended up having dinner with was really lovely, but had like a very presumptuous like assumption about women.
Ah, yes, which is, as we were talking about,
it was very frustrating because it reminded me of like a lot of like things like sometimes I saw between people back in the day, like like how to be like a good housewife sort of thing. I was just really mad because like I was like a guest in their house and they were very lovely people, but then there were so many like things that they would say that I was just thought was really wrong. Or for example, all three of us were, university students. But the only person that he was willing to talk to and like to talk about like academics and such was the man that I was with.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's sort of like the ugly side of Italian culture that we were talking about before.
Yeah, and it's like that's something that like I mean I can't like change fully, but I just want to like have like a little like if like people who like identify as men can't do it, then I will.
Yeah, and so you partly in Silvio you could almost make the man that you'd want to see in the world.
Exactly. Like, a few of my friends when I first started performing also said it was like the man that I wanted to be with. Like I had the hot for myself and I was like, yeah, I mean, you're not wrong.
Now that's the one thing I was wondering. We mentioned that Silvio's bisexual and that so wooing people in isolation is part of the it was also grouped under the LGBTQI section of Fringe. That Have you had the misfortune of dating straight men, or you have a more refined palate?
Yeah, but it's okay. Like, I mean, it doesn't like to me. It's more about the person than like what they identify, and it's also like sexuality is fluid and all this stuff. So it's like, like labels are good and they're helpful. Like for me, it was something that was really good to have because it made me feel like what I was feeling and all that stuff was very
I guess
very
sometimes,
valid.
yeah, makes it valid, and sometimes
And
when
I guess like it's kind of like happenstance. Like at first I didn't really put that on him, but then it's like every show that I did that was live, right? Silvio was like always ended up with a guy instead of a woman. So he would always talk about women on stage, but then like as soon as he got the chance, he would like, you know, have two shirtless men fighting over him. Like I'm not even joking. That literally happened once.
yeah, that almost plays into. That reminds me of. I don't know if you've listened to the podcast. My Dad Wrote a Porno, but a big part of that is how the character of Belinda, she just ends up getting with both men and women, and like there's nothing. It's not really addressed. That it's not seen as a problem, and people have even written into the show that by seeing Belinda just hooking up with whoever she wants to, it's made them, be able to recognize their own sexuality a bit more. And, some women have realized that they're bisexual after, listening to My Dad Wrote a Porno.
Who would have thought?
Yeah. And
they were like, dads. Hello.
yeah, no, it's probably be a good one for you to give a listen if you wanted, and see what else is out there, especially in this more, exploring sexuality and such. But yeah, and look, I was wondering as well. So, is there anything else that you've done in previously? You mentioned cabaret. That Silvio's a drag king character, but has there been anything else like that you've done before?
Like in regards to Silvio, or
even like just performing in a broader sense. Like you mentioned, you did some things through Monash.
Yeah, so like for me, I like to like kind of have like a bit of a like doing a lot of different things in different performance kind of settings. So I like I tried to like get every single experience as like a performer, technician, director, and various different things like that. So like I ended up Monash, I did like a minor in performance and theatre. And through there I kind of explored directing. And then there was like a show that I did that like was quite successful, although it felt like it was really bad when I did it. And then I'm not saying any names because I like kind of roasted it. And then I love lighting designing, so you'll kind of see kind of that experience, like that kind of feeling of lights and stuff like that in the show itself. I really like that. I've always had like fun with like various different like positions. I guess it's like for me, I tried really hard to kind of do straight theatre.
Okay.
I always got frustrated at the fact that a lot of the female roles were very passive. And I'm not a very passive person, so it's just like to act like a passive person kind of infuriated me. I was like, I want to do things. I want to be the one that this story is about. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and that is one of those problems that keeps coming up. Talking about just like even really storytelling and characters in general.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I always would say like a play. I'd be like, oh, this woman's so passive, and then they're like, oh no, she isn't. Like she holds the family together, and I'm like, yeah, but she has to go through all of that emotional weight and have to deal with everyone's problems. Like if it was me, I'd be like, no, thank you. Like I think that's something that like sometimes I really appreciate it when there's like a really big plethora of writers. Like I think that makes a big difference on how like women or like people are like generally are perceived.
Yeah, there's that wider perspective, and so that a woman's strength doesn't come from the ability to put up with the bullshit of their own situation, that they take a more active role. And
Exactly. Like I just find that really frustrating because that's not what I see in reality in my real life. And like to me, sometimes with that media, I think if that's what people assume like is like the norm, then like I think that that's kind of problematic in society, that like that's how we present women always.
no, that makes sense. And so, look, we are coming up to the hour here. So that I've got a link to the show and to Silvio's Facebook page in the description. But is there anything else that you'd want people to find or check out?
So I would say check out my Instagram because it's quite fun. I try and put as many memes, trying to convince people to see the show, at Silvio Di Baci. I'd say like the show is just like in Silvio's words, "What up, sexy people? My name is Silvio Di Baci. The show is full of beauty, friendship, boring people, and honestly, if you see this show, you will be so happy. You'll be so happy. I promise it. If you don't like it, you can tell me in the comments because it's live streamed. Thank you."
Yeah, and that's probably a good thing to just clarify as well. So you'll be performing for people live, just over the internet.
Yeah, so like there's a bit of, so like what I do is I use some people's comments. So if you send me a comment, it will most likely come up in the show.
And then Silvio can respond to that, and bit of back and forth there. Boom, got your hour of entertainment.
Like I like to, instead of like, you know, necessarily being like, "Oh, what are you saying?" random person who's like messaging me, it's more like, "Oh, thank you, that's beautiful. I really needed that," you know?
Yeah.
Like building up, not putting down.
And maybe some of the fun with that is no matter what they say or comment, that it's always taken in the positive by Silvio.
Yeah, he's just like very like happy man.
All right. Well, I am completely lost. For some reason, tab is not working while I'm playing Duke Nukem here. That you use that to bring up the map. I know that Duke Burger is locked and I have to find the blue card, but I probably haven't played this game in 20 years, so I can't remember where it is. So, look, thanks for joining me here, Maria. As we mentioned, that I've got all the where you can find everything in the description, and yeah, it was great talking to you.
No worries. Yeah. So it's on the 19th, 20th, and 21st, if anyone's interested, as well as if you're ever into like doing an Age of Empires sesh with me, Tom, anytime, let me know.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. If I don't already have it somewhere, I'm sure I could pick it up pretty cheap, or I'll just hunt.
I'm pretty sure it's pretty cheap on Steam.
I'll hunt around the back of the shelves of a Coles and see if I can still find a cereal box.
Yeah, find it in the
disc.
LCMs.
And don't worry, we'll set up an army of big daddies and man of wars, and we'll crush the red team into oblivion.
Yeah.
All right.